Officer Jake Morrison sat in his decade-old Honda Civic, parked 3 blocks away from the Los Angeles Metro Police Department headquarters, trying to remember how to breathe. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed a 23-year-old man who looked more like a terrified teenager playing dress-up in his father's police uniform. The navy blue fabric was so new it still had crease marks from the package, and his badge, Shield number 2847, gleamed with an almost accusatory brightness in the early morning sun. This was supposed to be the proudest moment of his life. 6 months of grueling academy training, countless hours of physical conditioning, endless nights studying criminal law and procedure, all leading to this single morning. Yet here he sat, paralyzed by a cocktail of excitement and pure, undiluted terror. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white, and he could feel sweat beginning to pool beneath his regulation uniform collar despite the cool November air. Jake glanced at the photograph clipped to his son's visor, his younger sister, Emily, grinning gap-toothed at age 8, holding a stuffed German Shepherd toy. That photo was his reminder, his purpose, his anchor. When Emily had been kidnapped 13 years ago during what should have been an ordinary trip to the grocery store, it had been a K-9 unit that saved her life. Officer Bravo and his dog Shadow had tracked her scent through 4 miles of dense urban terrain in less than 4 hours, finding her locked in an abandoned warehouse before her abductor could return. Jake remembered his parents' tear-streaked faces when Emily was brought home safe. He remembered Shadow's alert, intelligent eyes, and the gentle way the massive German Shepherd had let 8-year-old Jake pet him while the officers took statements. That moment had planted a seed that had grown into an unshakable conviction. He would become a police officer. He would protect people the way his sister had been protected. He would honor the sacrifice and dedication of officers like Bravo and K-9s like Shadow. But knowing your purpose and living, it were 2 entirely different things. Jake finally forced himself to exit the vehicle, nearly dropping his keys twice in the process. The Metro Police Department building loomed before him like a concrete and glass giant, 7 stories of law enforcement machinery, housing over 300 officers, detectives, and support staff. The building's reputation preceded it. This was where careers were made or shattered, where the city's toughest cases were solved, and where only the most competent officers survived. The morning roll call started in 20 minutes. Jake couldn't afford to be late on his first day. He pushed through the heavy glass doors into the lobby, immediately assaulted by a symphony of police work in motion. Phones rang incessantly. Radio static crackled from dispatch speakers. Officers in various states of urgency moved past him, some carrying file folders, others escorting handcuffed suspects, a few laughing at some shared joke he wasn't privy to. The air smelled like burnt coffee, printer ink, and the peculiar mixture of cleaning products and stress sweat that seemed universal to police stations everywhere. Nobody acknowledged his arrival. Why would they? To these veterans, he was just another fresh-faced rookie who probably wouldn't last 6 months. Statistics weren't in his favor. Nearly 40% of new officers quit within their first 2 years, unable to handle the stress, the hours, the constant exposure to humanity's darkest impulses. Jake approached the front desk, where a civilian administrator with reading glasses and an expression of permanent exhaustion barely glanced up. "Badge number," she droned. 2847, Officer Morrison, it's my first. "3rd floor, report to Sergeant Davis. He's your training officer. Elevators are broken. Take the stairs." She'd already returned her attention to her computer screen before Jake could respond. The stairwell echoed with his nervous footsteps. With each floor, Jake's anxiety ratcheted higher. He desperately needed something to steady his nerves, to give his shaking hands something to do. The break room on the 3rd floor was mercifully empty, and Jake made a beeline for the industrial coffee maker. The pot was still half full from the early shift, the liquid inside tar black and probably strong enough to strip paint. "Perfect." He poured himself the largest cup available, a nearly oversized mug emblazoned with "World's Okayest Cop," and added just enough cream to make the coffee slightly less lethal. The warmth seeping through the ceramic gave him something to focus on, something tangible to anchor himself. He took a tentative sip. It tasted like battery acid and burnt rubber, but the caffeine hit his system like a defibrillator, jump-starting his confidence. Jake checked his watch. 14 minutes until roll call. He needed to find Sergeant Davis and introduce himself. The third floor opened into a sprawling, open-plan office, dozens of desks arranged in organized chaos, filing cabinets lining the walls, wanted posters and departmental notices covering every available surface. At least 50 people were working in the space, their conversations creating a low hum of professional activity. Clutching his coffee like a talisman, Jake navigated between the desks, his eyes scanning name plates and faces, trying to identify anyone who might be Sergeant Davis. His academy instructors had described Davis as old school but fair, which could mean anything from strict disciplinarian to by-the-book hardass. Jake's attention was split between reading desk nameplates and not spilling his coffee when he heard someone call out sharply, "Coming through." He turned his head a fraction too late. A female officer with an armful of case files was moving fast, focused on her destination, not watching for obstacles. They collided at the intersection of two pathways between desks. Jake's boot caught on something, maybe a chair leg, maybe his own feet betraying him in his nervousness. His body pitched forward, arms windmilling uselessly for balance. The coffee cup flew from his grip, tumbling end over end through the air. He watched with the crystalline clarity that only comes during moments of absolute disaster as the dark liquid began its inevitable arc toward the floor. Except it didn't hit the floor. It hit something far, far worse. The coffee made contact with a sickening splash that seemed to echo through the entire third floor like a gunshot. Jake's horror-stricken eyes followed the trajectory as the scalding liquid, still hot enough to steam in the air-conditioned office, drenched the head and shoulders of a magnificent German shepherd that had been lying peacefully beside a desk, completely unaware of the caffeinated catastrophe hurtling toward it. For one frozen heartbeat, nothing happened. The dog simply sat there, coffee dripping from its ears, muzzle, and the thick fur around its neck. Then reality caught up. The German shepherd erupted with a yelp that could have shattered windows. The animal leaped to its feet with explosive force, his powerful body convulsing as he shook violently, sending a spray of coffee droplets in a perfect radius around him like some kind of demented lawn sprinkler. The dog's dignified composure, the calm, professional demeanor that all K-9 officers possessed, had been completely obliterated by the unexpected coffee bath. The sound cut through every conversation in the open office. Keyboards stopped clicking. Phone calls were paused mid-sentence. Heads swiveled in perfect synchronization toward the source of the commotion. Jake stood frozen, his empty hand still outstretched in the exact position it had been when holding the cup, his face cycling through shades of white that shouldn't have been medically possible. "Oh God! Oh no! No, 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 no!" The words tumbled from Jake's mouth in a panicked litany as his brain struggled to process the magnitude of what he'd just done. This wasn't just any dog. Even through his blind panic, Jake could see the official vest, could read the bold letters, "Police K-9 Unit, do not pet." He just assaulted a police dog, on his first day, in his first 15 minutes. Jake dropped to his knees so fast he felt the impact through his kneecaps, his hands reaching out instinctively toward the distressed animal. "I'm so sorry. Oh God, buddy, I'm so sorry." His voice cracked with genuine anguish. The German shepherd continued his full-body shake, and Jake could see coffee soaking into the dog's dark fur, matting it down in wet clumps. The animal's brown eyes fixed on him with a mixture of confusion and what Jake could only interpret as profound betrayal. The dog let out a low growl, not aggressive, not a warning of attack, but the unmistakable sound of a deeply annoyed creature who had just had his morning rudely interrupted by a deluge of French roast. Jake's hands hovered uselessly in the air, afraid to touch the dog without permission, but desperate to fix the unfixable situation. "Please don't bite me," Jake whispered, more to himself than the dog. "Please, please don't bite me." The silence in the office was deafening. Jake could feel dozens of eyes boring into his back, could sense the collective held breath of every officer within visual range. Then, like a dam breaking, the reactions began. A young female officer near the copy machine let out a snort of suppressed laughter, quickly covering her mouth with her hand. Someone further back in the office muttered, "Oh, Jesus Christ." Another voice, distinctly amused despite trying to sound serious, said, "Did that new guy just—" "He did," came the confirmation from somewhere Jake couldn't see. "The rookie just dumped coffee on a K9. Jake fumbled in his pockets, producing a crumpled napkin he'd grabbed from the break room. It was laughably inadequate for the task at hand, like trying to empty an ocean with a teaspoon. But he dabbed frantically at the dog's fur anyway. The German shepherd stood perfectly still now, enduring Jake's panicked ministrations with the patience of a saint, though his expression clearly communicated that this was the indignity of a lifetime. "Is anyone going to help me?" Jake's voice pitched higher with desperation as he looked around the office. "Please, someone, whose dog is this? I need paper towels, a towel, something." The officers exchanged glances, and Jake caught several barely suppressed grins. This was entertainment. He was entertainment. The new rookie providing the morning's comedy show, and apparently nobody was in any rush to rescue him from his predicament. Sergeant Marcus Davis, a barrel-chested man in his mid-50s with iron-gray hair, and a face that had seen everything the job could throw at it twice over, finally pushed away from his desk and approached with measured steps. He moved like a man who had all the time in the world, and found the entire situation infinitely amusing despite his neutral expression. "Son," Davis said, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of 3 decades on the force, "you might want to stop touching that dog." Jake's hands froze mid-pat. "I'm just trying to help. The coffee was hot and I—" "That's not just any dog, rookie." Davis crossed his arms over his chest, his expression shifting from amused to something approaching pity. "That's Rex, K9 Officer Rex, to be precise." "Okay, yes, I can see that from his vest," Jake said quickly, words tumbling over each other. "Is Rex okay? Is he burned? Do I need to call a vet? I'll pay for everything, I swear I'll—" "Rex is a decorated K9 officer," Davis interrupted, his tone taking on the quality of someone delivering bad news. 15 successful drug busts, 3 missing person rescues, 1 hostage situation where he took down an armed suspect. He paused for effect. "He's also a very good boy who doesn't appreciate impromptu coffee baths." Jake's face, which had already been pale, somehow found another shade lighter. "I understand. Is he your partner? Are you his handler? I'll do anything to make this right." "Not my partner, son." Davis shook his head slowly, and Jake could swear he saw the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of the sergeant's mouth. "But you're gonna wish he was." "What do you mean?" Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. Davis gestured toward the far end of the office, where a private corner office had its door currently closed, blinds drawn. A name plate beside the door read, "Commander Thomas Mitchell, Precinct Chief." "That's Commander Mitchell's office," Davis explained, his voice dropping to match Jake's whisper. "Rex is his K9 partner, has been for 6 years." The world tilted sideways. Jake felt his stomach drop approximately 3 floors. The precinct commander, the man who runs this entire department. "That's the one." "His dog. I poured hot coffee on the precinct commander's dog." "You're catching on quick, Morrison, that's good. You're gonna need those deductive reasoning skills when Mitchell gets back from his morning briefing." Davis checked his watch with deliberate slowness. "Which should be in about, 3 minutes." Jake looked down at Rex, who had finally stopped shaking and now sat with as much dignity as a coffee-soaked police dog could muster, regarding Jake with those intelligent brown eyes. The dog's expression seemed to say, "You have no idea how much trouble you're in, human." "I'm fired, aren't I?" Jake asked, his voice hollow. "I haven't even made it to roll call and I'm already fired." Davis clapped a heavy hand on Jake's shoulder. "Well, Morrison, that depends entirely on Commander Mitchell's mood this morning, and whether Rex here decides to forgive you." He leaned in closer, his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. "Word of advice. When Mitchell walks through that door, don't make excuses. Don't blame the coffee, the collision, or bad luck. Own it completely. It's your only chance." Jake swallowed hard, his mouth as dry as desert sand despite being surrounded by the smell of spilled coffee. He could hear footsteps approaching from the stairwell, heavy, measured, authoritative footsteps that seemed to mark time like a countdown to judgment. Rex's ears perked up. The dog's entire demeanor shifted from annoyed victim to alert professional. His tail gave a single wag of recognition. Those footsteps were getting closer. Jake remained on his knees, surrounded by coffee-stained napkins, facing a dog who smelled like a Starbucks exploded on him, waiting to meet the man whose career he just torpedoed before his own had even begun. The stairwell door opened. The stairwell door swung open with the kind of deliberate force that announced someone who never needed to prove their authority. It simply radiated from them like heat from the sun. Jake remained frozen on his knees, his heart hammering so hard against his ribcage he thought it might actually crack a rib. Every officer in the immediate vicinity suddenly became very interested in their paperwork, their computer screens, anything that would allow them to witness the impending disaster without being called upon to intervene. But the person who emerged wasn't Commander Mitchell. Instead, Officer Linda Chen, a petite Asian woman with her hair pulled back in a severe bun, stepped through carrying a stack of case files. She took 3 steps before stopping abruptly, her nose wrinkling. "Why does it smell like Café Bustillo exploded in here?" Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the tableau before her, Jake on his knees, surrounded by coffee-stained napkins, and Rex sitting with the patient resignation of someone enduring a very bad day. "New guy baptized Rex," someone called out from across the room, earning a ripple of barely suppressed laughter. Chen's eyebrows shot up. "With coffee, Mitchell's Rex." She looked at Jake with something between pity and amusement. "Oh, you poor, stupid rookie." "Is Commander Mitchell really that bad?" Jake asked desperately, looking up at her with pleading eyes. "Maybe if I explain it was an accident." "Mitchell isn't bad," Chen interrupted, shifting her files to one hip. "He's actually one of the fairest commanders I've ever worked under, firm but fair. He listens, he supports his officers, and he genuinely cares about this department." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "But Rex isn't just his K-9 partner. That dog is his family." Sergeant Davis nodded in agreement, settling against a nearby desk. "Mitchell's wife passed away 4 years ago. Cancer. No kids. Rex was her idea. She convinced him to get certified as a K-9 handler because she said he needed something to care for besides his job." Davis's usual gruff demeanor softened slightly. "Rex got him through the worst year of his life. That dog sat by Mitchell's side through every dark moment, never judged, never demanded anything except loyalty and care in return." Jake felt his stomach twist into increasingly complex knots. This wasn't just about damaging department property or embarrassing himself. He'd hurt something precious to a man who'd already lost so much. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I would never." "Nobody's saying you did it on purpose, kid," Davis said, but his tone carried a warning. "But intent doesn't always matter as much as impact. You need to understand that." Rex shifted his position, and Jake caught a whiff of the coffee-soaked fur. The dog's normally pristine coat was matted and damp, and small coffee droplets still clung to his whiskers. The German shepherd gazed at Jake with those intelligent eyes that seemed to pierce right through his soul, cataloging every mistake, every moment of carelessness that had led to this catastrophe. Officer Chen set her files down and crouched beside Rex, running her hand expertly along his sides, checking for any signs of actual injury. "The coffee wasn't hot enough to burn him," she announced after a moment. "He's more offended than hurt. Aren't you, boy?" Rex's tail gave a half-hearted wag at her gentle tone. "But he's going to need a proper bath. That coffee's going to get sticky as it dries, and it'll mat his coat if it's not cleaned soon." "I'll do it," Jake said immediately. "Just tell me where the grooming supplies are and I'll—" "Absolutely not," Davis cut him off firmly. "First, you're not trained in K9 handling. Second, you've done enough damage for one morning. And third," he paused, tilting his head slightly, "you hear that?" Jake strained his ears. At first he heard nothing unusual, just the ambient sounds of the precinct, the distant sirens from the street below, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Then he caught it, footsteps again, different from before, heavier, more measured, each step deliberate and purposeful, the gait of someone who had walked these halls so many times they could navigate them blindfolded. Every officer who'd been sneaking glances at the unfolding drama suddenly became intensely focused on their work. Conversations dropped to whispers or ceased entirely. Even Chen straightened up quickly, smoothing her uniform as though preparing for inspection. "That's him," someone muttered from a nearby cubicle. Rex's entire demeanor transformed. His ears stood at full attention, his posture shifted from resigned tolerance to alert professionalism. The dog stood, shaking once more, a final attempt to restore some dignity before his handler arrived, and his tail began to wag with genuine enthusiasm. Whatever annoyance Rex felt toward Jake clearly paled in comparison to his joy at his partner's return. The footsteps grew closer. Jake could track their progress, from the stairwell landing, down the short corridor, approaching the main office floor. He considered standing up but found his legs had apparently forgotten how to function. His mouth was so dry he couldn't have spoken if his life depended on it, and he was increasingly convinced it might. Through the forest of desks and dividing walls, Jake finally caught his first glimpse of Commander Thomas Mitchell. The man was a monument to career law enforcement. 6'3", with shoulders that filled his uniform like he was built specifically for it. His hair was steel gray, cut in a precise military fade that hadn't been fashionable since the 1990s, but somehow worked for him perfectly. His face was all angles and authority, sharp jawline, high cheekbones, eyes the color of storm clouds that had probably made countless suspects confess, just to avoid prolonged exposure to that penetrating gaze. Mitchell carried a tablet in one hand and a travel mug in the other, clearly his own coffee, safely contained. His uniform was immaculate, every crease sharp enough to cut paper, every brass button polished to a mirror shine. He moved with the confidence of someone who had earned his position through decades of service, who had seen everything the job could throw at him, and had emerged not just intact but stronger. He was also, Jake noticed with sinking certainty, the kind of man who noticed everything. Mitchell's stride didn't falter as he entered the main office area, but Jake saw the exact moment when the commander registered that something was wrong. His eyes, those sharp, all-seeing eyes, scanned the room with practiced efficiency, noting the unusual silence, the way officers weren't quite meeting his gaze, the tension hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. Then his gaze dropped to Rex. Mitchell stopped walking. His expression, which had been neutral and professional, underwent a subtle but unmistakable shift. His eyes widened fractionally. His jaw tightened. The hand holding his coffee mug lowered slowly, as though he needed to be absolutely certain of what he was seeing. "Rex," Mitchell's voice cut through the silence like a blade, deep, controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of concern that sent chills down Jake's spine. "What happened to you, boy?" The German shepherd trotted toward his handler, his gait slightly awkward due to the damp fur, leaving a trail of coffee-scented paw prints across the industrial carpet. When Rex reached Mitchell, the dog sat immediately, the perfect demonstration of training and discipline, but his ears remained slightly flattened, broadcasting his displeasure at his current state. Mitchell set down his tablet and coffee mug with careful precision, then crouched to Rex's level. His large hands moved expertly over the dog's body, checking for injuries with the gentle competence of someone who had performed this examination 1,000 times. Jake watched those hands, scarred knuckles, calloused palms, the hands of a man who'd done real work, move through Rex's matted fur. "You're soaked," Mitchell murmured, his voice softer now, meant only for his partner. "And you smell like—" He paused, sniffing slightly. "French roast, what the hell happened?" The commander's eyes lifted from Rex and began scanning the surrounding area. They moved methodically. The coffee-stained floor, the scattered napkins, the overturned chair from Jake's collision, and finally, inevitably, to Jake himself. Still kneeling, still frozen, still very much looking like the guilty party in whatever crime scene Mitchell was now processing. Their eyes met. Jake had faced down academy instructors, had stared down the barrel during firearms training, had even been pepper-sprayed as part of his certification. None of those experiences had prepared him for the weight of Commander Thomas Mitchell's full attention. "Stand up," Mitchell said quietly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive, but it carried the absolute expectation of immediate compliance. Jake's legs remembered how to work. He scrambled to his feet, nearly losing his balance in the process, and stood at attention with his hands rigidly at his sides. He was vaguely aware that he had coffee stains on his own uniform now, that his carefully prepared first-day appearance had been destroyed just as thoroughly as his career prospects. Mitchell rose to his full height, and Jake had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. The commander stood at least 5 inches taller, and the difference felt like a canyon. "Name," Mitchell said, one word, a command disguised as a request. "Morrison, sir, Officer Jake Morrison, badge 2847. Jake's voice somehow functioned despite his terror. "Today is my first day, sir." "Your first day," Mitchell repeated slowly, as though testing the words for hidden meaning. His eyes moved from Jake to Rex, then back again. "And in your first," he checked his watch, 17 minutes in this precinct, you've managed to assault my K9 partner with what appears to be an entire cup of coffee." "It was an accident, sir, Mitchell held up one hand. Jake's mouth snapped shut. "My office, 5 minutes." Mitchell's voice remained eerily calm, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. "Bring towels, fix your partner." "Yes, sir," Jake managed. Mitchell looked at Sergeant Davis. "Get Morrison cleaned up and in my office, and find out who was supposed to be supervising him." "On it, Commander." Mitchell gave Rex one more gentle pat, his expression softening briefly as he looked at his partner. "Come on, boy. Let's get you a proper bath." He straightened, picking up his tablet and coffee, and walked toward his office. Rex trotted after him, tail still wagging despite his bedraggled appearance. The moment Mitchell's office door closed, the entire floor seemed to exhale collectively. "Well," Chen said, breaking the silence, "that went better than expected." Jake stared at her in disbelief. "Better? How could that possibly have been better?" "He didn't fire you on the spot," Davis pointed out, already moving toward the supply closet. "Which means he's going to give you a chance to explain yourself. Trust me, kid, that's more than most people would get in this situation." Jake watched through the office windows as Mitchell carefully towel-dried Rex, his movements gentle and practiced despite his obvious displeasure with the situation. The commander's face was impassive, but there was something in the way he handled his K9 partner, a tenderness that spoke volumes about the bond between them. 5 minutes to prepare for what would either be the shortest career in LAPD history or somehow, miraculously, a chance at redemption. Jake grabbed the towels Davis offered and headed toward Commander Mitchell's office, each step feeling like a walk toward his own execution. The walk to Commander Mitchell's office felt like the longest 30 feet of Jake Morrison's life. Each step echoed in his ears like a funeral drum, and the weight of every officer's eyes following his progression made his uniform feel like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He clutched the stack of clean towels Davis had shoved into his arms, his knuckles white from gripping them like they were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand beneath his feet. The door to Mitchell's office was solid oak, dark and imposing, with a frosted glass panel that prevented Jake from seeing what awaited him inside. The nameplate beside it read Commander Thomas Mitchell in brass letters that had been polished so many times they developed a warm patina. Below it, a smaller plaque stated, K9 Unit Coordinator. Jake raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Through the door he could hear Mitchell's voice, low, soothing, completely different from the controlled authority he'd used in the office. "I know, boy, I know it's uncomfortable. We'll get you cleaned up proper. Just give me a minute here." The sound of running water followed, presumably from a sink. Jake realized Mitchell must have a private bathroom attached to his office, a commander's privilege. He could hear Rex's tags jingling, the sound of the dog moving around, and Mitchell's continued murmuring reassurances. Jake finally forced himself to knock, 3 sharp raps. "Enter," came Mitchell's voice, reverting instantly to its command tone. Jake pushed the door open and stepped into what felt less like an office and more like a museum dedicated to a life in law enforcement. The walls were covered with commendations, photographs, certificates, and memorabilia spanning what must have been 3 decades of service. A younger Mitchell in Marine Corps dress blues stood at attention in one frame. Another photo showed him receiving a Medal of Valor from a former mayor. A shadow box displayed an American flag, folded into a precise triangle. But it was the personal touches that caught Jake's attention and twisted the knife of guilt even deeper into his gut. On the credenza behind Mitchell's desk sat a photograph of the commander with a beautiful woman, auburn hair, bright smile, laughing at something off camera. Her hand rested on a younger Rex's head, and Mitchell's arm was around her shoulders. The way he looked at her in that photo spoke of a love that transcended words. Next to it, another photo, Mitchell in a cemetery, kneeling beside a headstone, Rex sitting solemnly at his side. Even in the still image, Jake could see the grief etched into every line of Mitchell's face. "Morrison, over here." Mitchell's voice pulled Jake's attention away from the painful intimacy of those photographs. The commander stood in the doorway of the small bathroom, his uniform jacket removed and hung precisely on a coat rack, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Rex stood in what appeared to be a modified dog washing station, a raised platform with a handheld sprayer attachment and a drain. The German Shepherd's fur was soaked with clean water now, and Mitchell was working shampoo through the dog's coat with practiced efficiency. "The towels," Mitchell said, gesturing with his chin since both hands were occupied with Rex. "Set them on the desk." Jake obeyed immediately, placing the stack down with care, then stood at attention, unsure whether he should leave or stay. Mitchell made the decision for him. "Close the door, have a seat." Jake closed the door and lowered himself into one of the 2 chairs facing Mitchell's desk. From this vantage point, he could watch Mitchell work on Rex through the open bathroom door. The commander's movements were gentle but thorough, his fingers working through the dog's thick coat to ensure every trace of coffee was removed. Rex stood perfectly still, occasionally turning his head to lick Mitchell's arm, a gesture of affection and trust that made Jake's chest constrict. 6 years, Mitchell said suddenly, breaking the silence without looking up from his work. "Rex and I have been partners for 6 years, 3 months and 14 days. He rinsed a section of Rex's back, the water running clear now. He was 2 years old when he came to me, fresh out of K9 Academy, top of his class, smart as hell, loyal to a fault, and absolutely fearless when the situation demands it." Jake remained silent, sensing that Mitchell was speaking more to organize his own thoughts than to address him directly. "My wife, Catherine, she's the one who convinced me to apply for the K9 unit." Mitchell's voice softened almost imperceptibly on her name. Said I was too married to the job, that I needed something that would force me to go home at reasonable hours, something that depended on me for more than just arrest statistics and case clearances. He paused, working shampoo through Rex's tail. She was right. She usually was. The silence stretched for a moment before Mitchell continued. Catherine died 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, diagnosed stage 4, gone in 8 months. His hands never stopped moving, never faltered in their care of Rex, but Jake could hear the weight of grief in every word. Do you know what got me through that, Morrison? What kept me from eating my service weapon during the worst of it? Jake's throat was too tight to speak. He shook his head. This dog. Mitchell's hand rested on Rex's head and the German Shepherd leaned into the touch. Every morning, no matter how little I'd slept, no matter how much I wanted to just stop existing, Rex needed me. Needed to be fed, walked, trained, cared for. He didn't judge me for crying into his fur at 2 in the morning. Didn't care that I was a wreck. He just was there, constant, loyal, dependable. Mitchell finally looked up, his storm gray eyes locking onto Jake's. So when I see my partner, my family, covered in coffee, distressed and uncomfortable, you'll have to forgive me if I take that somewhat personally. Sir, Jake's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. Sir, there's no excuse for what happened. It was careless, reckless, and completely my fault. I was nervous, not paying attention, moving too fast. I collided with Officer Chen and lost control of my coffee. He took a breath, forcing himself to maintain eye contact even though everything in him wanted to look away from that penetrating gaze. I would never, ever intentionally harm an animal, especially not a K-9 officer. But my intentions don't matter. I hurt Rex, I disrupted the office, and I've dishonored this uniform on my first day. I take full responsibility, and I'll accept whatever consequences you determine are appropriate. Mitchell studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he returned his attention to Rex, rinsing the final traces of shampoo from the dog's coat. Come here and hand me those towels. Jake jumped up, grabbing the stack and moving to the bathroom doorway. Mitchell took 3 towels and began the process of drying Rex, his movements still gentle despite the tension in his shoulders. What made you want to be a cop, Morrison? The question caught Jake off guard. Sir. Simple question, why this job, why this precinct? Jake swallowed hard. My sister Emily, she was kidnapped when she was 8 years old. I was 10. The memory was still vivid, still painful even after 13 years. A man grabbed her from the parking lot of a grocery store, just took her. My parents were frantic. The whole neighborhood was searching, but it was a K-9 unit that found her. Mitchell's hands paused briefly in their work before resuming. San Diego, 2012. I remember that case. You do? Jake's surprise was evident. Officer Marcus Bravo and his K-9 Shadow, German Shepherd like Rex, they tracked your sister through 4 miles of urban terrain in under 4 hours. Mitchell draped a towel over Rex's back, rubbing in circular motions. Found her in an abandoned warehouse off the I-5 corridor. Suspect was arrested 2 hours later trying to flee to Mexico. Got 25 to life. That's exactly right, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. Shadow saved my sister's life. Officer Bravo saved my family from the worst possible outcome. I was just a kid, but I knew right then, watching that dog work, seeing the dedication and skill, I knew that's what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be part of something that mattered, something that saved people. Mitchell finished drying Rex and straightened up, regarding Jake with a long, measuring look. Rex shook himself one final time, now clean and fluffy, looking far more dignified than he had 20 minutes ago. The dog moved past Mitchell and walked directly to Jake, sitting down and looking up at him with those intelligent brown eyes. He's judging you, Mitchell said, the ghost of something that might have been humor touching his voice. Rex is an excellent judge of character, better than most humans I know. Jake looked down at Rex, then slowly, carefully, extended his hand palm down for the dog to sniff. Rex's nose worked, investigating this human who had caused him such indignity. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Then Rex's tail wagged. Once, twice. The dog's tongue darted out, licking Jake's fingers in what could only be interpreted as forgiveness. "Well," Mitchell said, crossing his arms and leaning against the bathroom doorframe. "That's interesting." "Sir?" Jake didn't dare move, didn't want to break whatever tentative peace Rex had just offered. "Rex doesn't forgive easily. Trust me, I've seen him hold grudges against mail carriers for months." Mitchell's expression remained serious, but there was something different in his eyes now. "The fact that he's giving you a pass suggests he sees something in you, and I've learned to trust his instincts more than my own." Jake felt a flutter of hope in his chest but tried to suppress it. "Does this mean?" "It means I'm not firing you, yet." Mitchell moved back into his office proper, gesturing for Jake to follow. Rex trotted along, taking his position on a large dog bed in the corner, a plush setup that probably cost more than Jake's first car. "But we need to establish some ground rules, Officer Morrison. Sit." Jake sat, his posture rigid, hands folded in his lap. Mitchell settled into his chair behind the desk, his command presence filling the room despite his relaxed posture. "First, you will attend every K-9 training session we hold for the next 3 months. Weekends, evenings, whenever they're scheduled. You will learn proper protocol, handling procedures, and gain a deep understanding of what these animals do for this department." "Yes, sir." "Second, you will assist with K-9 unit community outreach. We do school demonstrations, public education events, fundraisers. You'll be there and you'll be helping." "Absolutely, sir." "Third," Mitchell leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his eyes boring into Jake's. "You will never, under any circumstances, bring an unsecured beverage into the K-9 training area or near any working police dog. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." Mitchell sat back, a long exhale escaping him. "Sergeant Davis speaks highly of your academy performance. Top marks in ethics, community relations, and tactical thinking. Your instructors noted that you have good instincts and genuine empathy, rare qualities in this line of work." He paused. "But instincts and empathy mean nothing if you can't translate them into awareness and discipline. This job will kill you or someone you care about if you can't stay focused." "I understand, sir. It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't." Mitchell's expression softened incrementally. "Everyone makes mistakes, Morrison. What separates good cops from bad ones isn't the absence of errors, it's how you respond when things go wrong. You took immediate responsibility. You showed genuine concern for Rex's welfare. You didn't make excuses or try to deflect blame. That counts for something." Jake felt the tightness in his chest begin to ease, though he didn't dare fully relax yet. "Now get out of my office," Mitchell said, though his tone had lost its edge. "Report to Sergeant Davis. He's your training officer and he's waiting for you. Try not to assault anyone else before lunch." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Jake stood, moving toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. "Commander Mitchell, I really am sorry about Rex, about everything." Mitchell nodded once. "Apology noted, Morrison. Now prove it through your actions." Jake left the office, closing the door softly behind him, feeling like he just survived an encounter with a force of nature. Through the frosted glass, he could see Mitchell's silhouette as the commander moved to sit beside Rex's bed, his hand resting on the dog's head in a gesture of affection and relief. Jake had been given a second chance he probably didn't deserve. He wasn't going to waste it. Jake stepped out of Commander Mitchell's office feeling like he'd just been granted a stay of execution, but the relief was short-lived. The entire third floor had gone suspiciously quiet, the kind of silence that descends when everyone is trying very hard to pretend they haven't been listening to every word spoken behind a closed door. At least 30 pairs of eyes tracked his movement from Mitchell's office back toward the main workspace, and Jake could practically feel the speculation radiating from every desk. Sergeant Marcus Davis stood near the coffee station. Ironically, arms crossed over his broad chest, his expression inscrutable. As Jake approached, the older man's weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so heavily tinged with amusement. "Well, well, the rookie lives to see hour two." Davis's gravelly voice carried just far enough for nearby officers to hear. "I had money on you being escorted out in tears. You just cost me $20, Morrison." "You were betting on whether I'd get fired." Jake's voice came out higher than he intended. "Kid, we bet on everything around here. It's how we cope with the existential dread of this job." Davis clapped a heavy hand on Jake's shoulder, steering him away from the cluster of openly starring officers. "But seriously, you must have said something right in there. Mitchell doesn't give second chances to people who waste his time." "He gave me K-9 training duty for 3 months, Jake said, still trying to process his good fortune. "Weekends and evenings, plus community outreach." Davis let out a low whistle. "That's not punishment, Morrison. That's an education. Most rookies would kill for that kind of direct access to the K-9 unit." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "Mitchell doesn't invest time in people he thinks are going to wash out. He sees something in you." Before Jake could respond, a voice called out from across the room. "Hey, coffee boy, you gonna assault any other animals today, or was Rex special?" Laughter erupted from several desks. Jake felt heat creeping up his neck, but Davis's hand on his shoulder tightened in warning. "That's Officer Ramirez," Davis said quietly. "Loud mouth, but he's harmless. You're gonna hear a lot worse in the coming weeks. The coffee incident is officially precinct legend now. How you handle it will determine whether you earn respect or become a permanent punchline." Jake straightened his shoulders. "What should I do?" "Own it. Don't get defensive, don't make excuses, and for God's sake, don't let them see it bother you." Davis released his shoulder. "Now come on. You're already an hour late for roll call, and we've got actual police work to do." The briefing room was a cramped space with fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry wasps and chairs that had been uncomfortable in 1987 and hadn't improved with age. Jake slid into a seat in the back row, hyper-aware of the sideways glances and whispered comments from other officers. At the front of the room, Lieutenant Sarah Brennan, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a reputation for running the tightest ship in the department, was going through the day's assignments. Domestic disturbance on 7th and Main, burglary in progress at the jeweler on Broadway, and we've got reports of a suspicious vehicle near Jefferson High School. Brennan's eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Jake before moving on. "Morrison, you're with Davis today. Stay close, stay quiet, and try not to assault any more department assets." More laughter. Jake kept his face neutral, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. "Yes, ma'am," he said clearly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Brennan's lips twitched, not quite a smile but something approximating approval. "Good. Everyone else, you know your assignments. Be safe out there." The briefing dispersed, officers collecting their gear and heading out for their shifts. Davis handed Jake a radio, a baton, and a stern look. "Your weapon stays holstered unless I explicitly tell you otherwise. Your mouth stays closed unless I ask you a direct question. Your eyes stay open and you observe everything. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "And Morrison," Davis's expression softened marginally, "forget about the coffee thing for now. Out there," he gestured toward the street beyond the precinct walls, "none of that matters. What matters is whether you can do the job, whether you can keep your head in a crisis, whether you have your partner's back when things go sideways." The morning patrol started quietly. Davis drove the cruiser through their assigned district, a mix of commercial properties, apartment buildings, and the kind of streets where trouble simmered just below the surface of normalcy. He kept up a running commentary, pointing out problem locations, known gang territories, and residents who were either reliable sources of information or chronic complainers to avoid. Police work is 95% boredom and 5% sheer terror, Davis explained as they cruised past a laundromat where a group of teenagers eyed the patrol car with practiced indifference. The trick is staying alert during the boredom so you're ready when the terror hits. Their first call came at 10:47 a.m., a shoplifting report at a convenience store on Olympic Boulevard. A clerk with tired eyes and a name tag reading Miguel pointed to a skinny kid, maybe 16, who stood defiantly near the candy aisle with his arms crossed. "He took 3 Red Bulls and a sandwich," Miguel explained. "I saw him on the camera. When I confronted him, he said he'd pay me back tomorrow." Davis approached the teen with the casual authority of someone who'd had this exact conversation 1,000 times. "What's your name, son?" "None of your business." Jake watched Davis's technique carefully. The sergeant didn't escalate, didn't posture or threaten. He simply stood there, patient and immovable, like a mountain waiting for the wind to tire itself out. "Here's how this works," Davis said calmly. "You've got 2 choices. Option 1, you give Miguel here the $23 those items cost, you apologize, and we all go about our day. Option 2, I run your name, find out you've got priors, and this petty theft becomes a violation of your probation, which gets you 6 months in juvie." The defiance in the teen's eyes flickered, replaced by calculation. "I don't have $23. "Then you're choosing option 2. "I'm hungry, man. My mom's not home and we don't have food in the house. What am I supposed to do?" Davis glanced at Miguel, who shrugged helplessly. "I can't just give away inventory. My boss will dock my pay." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Jake heard himself saying, "How much for the Red Bulls and the sandwich?" Miguel looked surprised. "Like I said, $23. Jake pulled out his wallet, extracted a 20 and a 5, and handed them to Miguel. "This covers it and a tip for your trouble." The teen stared at Jake like he'd grown a second head. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're hungry," Jake said simply. "But this is a one-time thing. You want to eat tomorrow. You go to Jefferson High School, they've got a food program. Free breakfast and lunch for students. No questions asked." Davis watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. After they left the store, the teen walking away with his food and a warning about better choices, Davis finally spoke. "That came out of your rent money, didn't it?" Jake shrugged. "I can eat ramen for a week." That was either the smartest thing I've seen a rookie do or the dumbest. I haven't decided which yet. Davis pulled back into traffic. "But I'll tell you this. You just prevented that kid from making a choice that would have derailed his life. Maybe he'll remember that. Maybe he'll make better decisions because one cop showed him humanity instead of just enforcing consequences." "Or maybe he'll rob another store tomorrow," Jake said quietly. "Maybe," Davis agreed. "That's the frustrating part of this job. You don't always get to see whether your actions made a difference. You just have to trust that doing the right thing matters, even when the results aren't immediately visible." They responded to 6 more calls that day. A noise complaint, a traffic accident, a welfare check on an elderly resident, a vandalism report, and 2 separate instances of teenagers skateboarding where they shouldn't. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make the evening news, but each interaction gave Jake a deeper understanding of what police work actually meant in practice. It wasn't about car chases and shootouts. It was about being present in the community, building trust where possible, enforcing boundaries when necessary, and trying, always trying, to leave situations better than you found them. As their shift wound down and they headed back to the precinct, Davis broke the comfortable silence. "You did good today, Morrison. Better than good, actually. You kept your mouth shut when you should, spoke up when it mattered, and you showed compassion without being stupid about it." "Thank you, sir." "But," Jake heard the unspoken word. "But one good day doesn't make a career. Tomorrow will be harder. The day after that harder still. This job will test you in ways the Academy never prepared you for. It'll show you the worst of humanity on a daily basis. It'll make you question whether anything you do actually matters. Davis pulled into the precinct parking lot. The coffee incident, that's nothing. The real test is whether you can keep showing up, keep caring, keep trying to make a difference even when everything tells you it's futile. Jake thought about the teenager, about Rex's forgiving lick, about Commander Mitchell's willingness to give him another chance. "I'm not going anywhere, Sergeant." Davis nodded slowly. "We'll see, Morrison, we'll see." As they walked back into the precinct, Jake caught sight of Commander Mitchell in the hallway, Rex walking obediently at his heel. The German shepherd's coat gleamed, completely recovered from his morning coffee bath. Mitchell gave Jake a single, brief nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Jake had survived his first day. The real work was just beginning. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of relentless sunshine that made Lowe's Angels both beautiful and unbearable. Jake pulled into the precinct parking lot at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes early for his first mandatory K-9 training session. His body ached from the week's patrol duties. His feet had developed blisters that had blisters, and he'd spent every evening studying K-9 handling manuals he'd checked out from the police library. But none of that mattered. This was his chance to prove Commander Mitchell's faith in him wasn't misplaced. The K-9 training facility occupied a converted warehouse behind the main precinct building. Jake had passed it dozens of times during the week but had never been inside. Now, standing before the reinforced steel door, he could hear dogs barking, not the chaotic yapping of untrained animals, but the purposeful, alert sounds of working police dogs. He pulled the door open and stepped into a world he'd only glimpsed from the outside. The facility was massive, easily 10,000 square feet of specialized training space. Obstacle courses dominated one section: A-frame ramps, tunnels, weave poles, and jumping barriers. Another area featured mock building facades with doors, windows, and hiding spots for suspect training. A third section contained what looked like a miniature urban environment complete with simulated vehicles, dumpsters, and alleyways. But it was the dogs that captured Jake's attention. 6 German shepherds, 2 Belgian Malinois, and 1 intimidating-looking Rottweiler occupied separate kennel areas, each dog alert and watching the humans with intelligent, assessing eyes. Their handlers moved among them with practiced ease, checking equipment, offering praise, preparing for the day's training. "Morrison, you're early." Commander Mitchell's voice came from behind an equipment rack. He emerged carrying training dummies and bite sleeves, Rex trotting at his side. The dog's ears perked up when he spotted Jake, and his tail gave a tentative wag. "Good morning, sir. I wanted to make sure I had time to," Jake gestured vaguely at the overwhelming space, "figure out where I should be." "Eager, that's good." Mitchell set down his equipment and studied Jake with those penetrating gray eyes. But eagerness without competence is just enthusiasm, and enthusiasm gets people hurt in this line of work. Today, you learn the fundamentals. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Clear. "Crystal clear, sir." For the next 4 hours, Jake received an education that made police academy training look like kindergarten nap time. Mitchell started with the basics: how to approach a K-9 officer, proper hand signals, voice commands in both English and the German most police dogs were trained to understand. Jake learned that Platz meant down, Bleib meant stay, and Fass was the attack command that should never, ever be used casually. "These aren't pets," Mitchell repeated for what must have been the 20th time. "They're officers with specialized training that takes years to develop. Each of these dogs represents an investment of over $30,000 and countless hours of work. But more than that," he paused, his hand resting on Rex's head, "they're partners who trust us with their lives. That trust is sacred." Jake watched as Mitchell demonstrated proper searching techniques using Rex. The commander would hide training aids, small pouches containing drug scents or articles of clothing, throughout the facility, then release Rex with a single German command. The dog's transformation was remarkable. The friendly, tail-wagging animal became a focused professional, his nose working methodically, his body language broadcasting concentration. When Rex found a target, he sat immediately and barked twice, the alert signal. Mitchell praised him lavishly, his stern demeanor melting into genuine affection. "Good boy, Rex. Brav, das ist gut." The dog's entire body wiggled with pleasure at his handler's approval. "Your turn," Mitchell said, handing Jake a training pouch. "Hide this somewhere in the urban training section. Make it challenging but fair, somewhere Rex could realistically encounter in the field." Jake took the pouch. It smelled vaguely of marijuana, a training scent, and jogged to the mock urban environment. He considered several locations before settling on tucking it inside a partially open trash can behind a simulated dumpster, covered with crumpled paper. Not too easy, but not impossible. When he returned, Mitchell had Rex in a ready position. "Release him when I give the command." Mitchell's hand dropped and he said sharply, "Such, Rex, such." Rex exploded into motion. Jake watched in awe as the German Shepherd methodically worked the area, his nose constantly moving, processing hundreds of scents simultaneously. The dog checked the ground, the air, the surfaces of objects. He moved with purpose but not recklessness, his training evident in every calculated step. 47 seconds later, Rex sat beside the trash can and barked twice. "That's it," Mitchell said quietly. "That's what years of training looks like: precision, focus, partnership." But the moment that changed everything came during the afternoon session. Mitchell had invited 2 other handlers to participate in a training scenario, a mock building search for a hidden suspect. Jake's role was to observe and learn. One handler, Officer Stevens, would play the suspect. His K9, a Belgian Malinois named Luna, would work with another handler, Officer Park, to locate him. The scenario began smoothly. Park released Luna, giving commands as the dog entered the mock building. But something went wrong. Stevens, hidden on the second floor, accidentally knocked over a precariously balanced training weight. The 40-pound plate fell, striking Luna's hindquarters. The dog yelped and stumbled, favoring her right rear leg. Park rushed to her side, but Luna, trained to work through discomfort, tried to continue searching despite obvious pain. "Abort scenario," Mitchell's command rang out. Everyone converged on Luna, whose tough dog facade was cracking. She whimpered, unable to put weight on her leg, her eyes wide with pain and confusion. Park's hands were shaking too badly to properly examine her. Stevens was apologizing repeatedly. Mitchell was on his radio calling for the veterinary unit. In the chaos, Luna's pain was escalating, her whimpers becoming sharper. Jake dropped to his knees beside the injured dog, his movements slow and deliberate. He'd grown up with dogs, had volunteered at an animal shelter during high school. More than that, he'd spent the entire week reading about K9 care and handling. "Luna, hey girl, it's okay," he murmured, his voice calm and soothing. He didn't touch her yet, injured animals could bite, but he let her see his hands, let her hear his voice. "You're such a good girl, so brave. Let's take a look at that leg, okay?" Luna's dark eyes fixed on him. Something in Jake's tone, his energy, cut through her panic. Her whimpering decreased slightly. "Jake, don't," Park started. "Let him work," Mitchell interrupted quietly. Jake continued his gentle monologue, gradually extending his hand for Luna to sniff. The Malinois investigated, then gave his fingers a tentative lick. Permission granted. Moving with exquisite care, Jake's hands traveled along Luna's body, checking for additional injuries while maintaining constant soothing verbal contact. When he reached her right hindquarters, he felt the tension in her muscles. Not a break, he was almost certain, but a significant contusion or possibly a muscle strain. "I think it's soft tissue damage," Jake said quietly, his fingers gentle as they assessed. No obvious fractures, good range of motion, but significant swelling starting. She needs ice and the vet, but I don't think it's an emergency surgery situation. Mitchell crouched beside him, his experienced hands following Jake's examination. After a moment, he nodded. Agreed. Good assessment, Morrison. The veterinary unit arrived minutes later and confirmed Jake's evaluation. Severe bruising, but no break. Luna would need rest and anti-inflammatories, but she'd make a full recovery. As the vet team carefully transported Luna to their vehicle, Park approached Jake. How did you know what to do? Most people freeze around an injured K9. My family always had dogs, Jake explained, and I've seen enough injuries to recognize the difference between painful and catastrophic. Plus, he glanced at Mitchell, I've been reading everything I can find about K9 care since Monday. Mitchell's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes, a reassessment, a recalibration. Morrison, go help Stevens reset the training equipment. Then meet me in my office. We need to talk. Jake's stomach dropped. Had he overstepped, interfered when he should have stayed back? 20 minutes later, standing once again in Mitchell's office, Jake braced for correction. Instead, Mitchell gestured to the chair. Sit and relax, you're not in trouble. Jake sat, though relaxing seemed impossible. Mitchell leaned against his desk, Rex settling at his feet. Officer Park has been Luna's handler for 3 years, but when his partner was hurt, he froze. Know why? Jake shook his head. Because he loves that dog so much, the thought of her being seriously injured paralyzed him. It's the risk of K9 work. These animals become family. We become emotionally invested in ways that can cloud judgment. Mitchell crossed his arms. You assessed the situation without that emotional attachment. You kept calm, read the dog's signals, and made a sound evaluation. That's exactly what a good K9 officer does. I just did what seemed right, sir. That's the point, Morrison. Your instincts were correct. You put the dog's welfare first, didn't let ego or panic drive your actions, and you'd clearly done your homework. Mitchell paused. How would you feel about accelerating your K9 training? Not as punishment, but as preparation for potentially joining the unit full-time. Jake's breath caught. Sir, are you serious? I don't joke about my K9 unit, Officer Morrison. For the second time that week, Jake felt his entire career trajectory shift. I'd be honored, sir, absolutely honored. Mitchell's stern face cracked into something approaching a smile. Good, because Rex here seems to think you're acceptable, and I've learned to trust his judgment more than my own. Rex's tail thumped against the floor, and Jake could have sworn the dog was smiling. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened in 1,000 small moments spread across 3 months of relentless dedication that redefined what Jake Morrison thought he was capable of enduring. His alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. every morning, a full 2 hours before his shift started. He'd go for a run with a weighted vest, building the endurance necessary to keep up with K9 officers in the field. By 6:00 a.m., he was at the training facility, helping prepare equipment, cleaning kennels, and studying the dogs' behaviors before their handlers arrived. He learned each animal's personality, Rex's patient wisdom, Luna's boundless energy after her recovery, Thor's intense focus, Bella's gentle nature despite her intimidating size. His apartment became a makeshift K9 study center. Books on animal behavior, veterinary first aid, scent detection theory, and law enforcement applications covered every surface. His laptop browser history was a deep dive into K9 case studies, training methodologies, and legal precedents involving police dogs. He watched hours of bodycam footage showing K9 units in action, studying the split-second decisions handlers made, the subtle communication between officer and dog. The other rookies thought he was insane. His academy classmates had scattered across different precincts, settling into normal patrol rhythms, working their shifts, going home, having lives outside the uniform. Jake barely remembered what that felt like. "You're going to burn out," his roommate Marcus warned one evening, finding Jake asleep at the kitchen table, a German-English K-9 command dictionary open beneath his face. "Morrison, you're working 16-hour days. This isn't sustainable." But Jake couldn't stop. Every time exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he'd remember that first day, the shame of Rex covered in coffee, the disappointment in Mitchell's eyes, the certainty that his career was over before it started. He'd been given a second chance that most people never received. Wasting it wasn't an option. Sergeant Davis noticed the change immediately. "You're different," he observed during a routine patrol in their 4th week together. "More focused, more confident. Whatever Mitchell's doing with you in that K-9 program is working." The confidence came from competence. Jake was no longer just a rookie fumbling through procedures. He understood the why behind the what. When they responded to calls, he could assess whether K-9 support might be beneficial. During a domestic disturbance, he recognized signs of drug manufacturing and called for a narcotic detection dog before entering. During a missing child case, he understood terrain challenges and helped coordinate the search grid. But the real test came on a Saturday afternoon during a community outreach event at Jefferson High School. Mitchell had assigned Jake to help coordinate the K-9 demonstration for Career Day. 200 restless teenagers crammed into a gymnasium, most of them more interested in their phones than police work. Jake had spent days preparing, creating presentation materials, coordinating with teachers, arranging the demonstration space. Commander Mitchell arrived with Rex, along with Officers Chen and Park with their K-9 partners. The plan was simple: show the students what police dogs could do, explain the training process, and hopefully inspire a few kids to consider careers in law enforcement. It started well. Mitchell's narcotics detection demonstration had the students' attention. Watching Rex locate hidden training aids with perfect precision was genuinely impressive. Chen's demonstration with her K-9, a Belgian Malinois named Shadow, showed tracking capabilities that seemed almost supernatural. Then Officer Park set up for the protection demonstration, the crowd favorite, where his German Shepherd Axel would demonstrate apprehension techniques using a bite sleeve. But something went wrong. Park released Axel toward the suspect volunteer, another officer in protective gear. But a student in the front row, thinking it would be funny, threw a basketball just as Axel launched into his run. The ball struck the dog mid-stride, startling him. Axel's trajectory shifted. Instead of targeting the padded sleeve, he was heading toward the crowd of students. Time seemed to slow. Jake saw the trajectory, saw the panic beginning to spread, saw Park shouting commands that Axel couldn't process through his confused instincts. Jake moved without thinking. He positioned himself between Axel and the students, dropped to one knee, and called out in a voice of absolute authority, "Axel, PLATZ, BLEIB." The German Shepherd's training overrode his confusion. He dropped flat, his momentum carrying him into a slide that stopped 3 feet from Jake. The dog remained in the down position, trembling slightly but obedient, waiting for his handler's next command. The gymnasium had gone silent. 200 students held their collective breath. Jake kept his voice calm, authoritative. "Gut Hund, Axel, Gut Hund." He didn't move, didn't break eye contact with the dog, didn't let his own racing heart translate into his tone. Park reached them seconds later, taking control of his partner with shaking hands. Mitchell stepped forward, addressing the stunned crowd with the commanding presence that made him a natural leader. "What you just witnessed is exactly why K-9 officers and their handlers train constantly. Officer Morrison prevented a potentially dangerous situation through quick thinking and proper command knowledge. This is real police work, staying calm in chaos, making split-second decisions, and trusting your training." He turned to Jake, And for the first time since that coffee-soaked Monday morning, Mitchell smiled. Not a small acknowledgement or a professional courtesy, but a genuine smile of pride. "Well done, Officer Morrison." The students erupted in applause. Several rushed forward with questions, but Jake barely heard them. He was focused on Axel, checking the dog for any signs of injury, speaking softly to help him calm down after the stressful incident. Later, as they packed up the equipment, Officer Park approached Jake with Luna at his side. "You saved my career today," he said quietly. "If Axel had reached those students, if there had been injuries, I would have been done. The K-9 program would have taken a massive hit." "You would have done the same for me," Jake replied. "Maybe, but I froze, Morrison. I saw my partner heading toward danger and I froze. You didn't." Park extended his hand. "Thank you." That evening, Mitchell called Jake into his office. Rex lay on his bed in the corner, and for once, the dog's presence felt less like judgment and more like companionship. "I've been watching you, Morrison, not just today, every day since our first conversation." Mitchell pulled out a folder from his desk. "You've logged over 200 volunteer hours with the K-9 unit. You've completed every certification course I recommended. You've studied material that veteran officers don't bother learning." He opened the folder, revealing official forms. "This is an application for K-9 handler candidacy. It's typically reserved for officers with 3 years minimum patrol experience." Jake's heart hammered. "Sir, I don't understand." "I'm recommending you for early consideration. If you're accepted, you'd start the formal handler training program in 6 months. Mitchell's expression grew serious. "This is not a guarantee. You'll compete against officers with far more experience. The program has a 40% failure rate. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done." "I want it," Jake said without hesitation, "more than anything." "Then prove it." Mitchell slid the application across the desk. "Keep doing what you're doing. Stay hungry, stay humble, and remember, every day is an audition." Jake took the application, his hands steady despite the emotions churning inside him. "I won't let you down, sir." "You already haven't, Morrison. Now don't stop." As Jake left the office, Rex lifted his head and watched him go. The dog's tail wagged once, a gesture of approval that meant more to Jake than any official commendation could. 3 months ago, he'd been the rookie who assaulted the commander's dog with coffee. Now, he was being considered for the most elite unit in the department. The real work was just beginning, but Jake Morrison had never been more ready for anything in his life. 11 months after the coffee incident, Jake Morrison stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his dress uniform for the 3rd time. His hands, the same hands that had trembled uncontrollably on his first day, were steady now. The face staring back at him had changed too. The nervous boy had been replaced by someone who looked like he belonged in the uniform, someone who'd earned the right to wear it. His apartment was different now. The K-9 study materials still covered most surfaces, but they'd been joined by commendations, training certificates, and a photograph that had become his most prized possession. Mitchell, Rex, and Jake at a community event, all 3 of them caught mid-laugh at something Officer Chen had said. Mitchell had signed it. To Morrison, proof that second chances matter. Keep earning it. Tonight was the LAPD Metro Division's annual recognition ceremony. Jake had been nominated for something. Sergeant Davis had let that much slip, but wouldn't tell him what. "Just show up, look presentable, and try not to spill anything on anyone," Davis had said with that trademark gravelly humor. The banquet hall at the historic Millennium Biltmore Hotel was packed with officers, their families, and department brass. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables decorated with blue and gold, LAPD colors. Jake spotted his parents in the crowd, his mother dabbing her eyes with a tissue despite nothing having happened yet. His sister Emily waved enthusiastically, her own daughter, Jake's 4-year-old niece, bouncing on her lap. "Morrison, over here," Officer Chen called from a table near the front. The K-9 unit had claimed the space, and Jake recognized most of the handlers he'd been training with. Rex lay beneath the table at Mitchell's feet, the only K9 allowed inside the formal event, wearing a ceremonial collar that gleamed under the lights. "You clean up nice, coffee boy," Officer Ramirez said, but his tone was warm now, the nickname stripped of its original mockery. Over the past year, Jake had become part of the fabric of the precinct, someone officers trusted, respected, and actually liked. Commander Mitchell stood as Jake approached, extending his hand. "Officer Morrison, good to see you dressed for success." "Thank you, sir." Jake shook his hand, still slightly awed by how much their relationship had evolved. Mitchell had become more than a commander. He was a mentor, occasionally almost a friend, though neither would ever quite say it that directly. The ceremony began with the typical formalities: the chief's address, recognition of retirements, awards for distinguished service. Jake found his attention drifting, watching Rex instead. The German shepherd's ears would perk up at certain sounds, his intelligent eyes tracking movement around the room with the same alertness he showed on duty. "And now," Chief Rodriguez's voice cut through Jake's observations, "we come to one of our most prestigious awards. The Officer of the Year recognition is given to someone who embodies the best of what it means to serve. This year's recipient has shown extraordinary dedication, remarkable growth, and an unwavering commitment to excellence that has inspired everyone who works with them." Jake clapped politely, wondering which veteran officer would receive the honor. Probably Chen. She'd closed 3 major cases this year. Or maybe Davis, who'd been nominated several times before. When this officer joined us, they made what might charitably be called a memorable first impression. Chief Rodriguez's eyes twinkled. In fact, they assaulted a K9 officer with a cup of coffee on their first day. Jake's blood turned to ice. Every eye in the room turned toward him. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. Emily was grinning so wide her face might split. But what happened next separated this officer from countless others who might have made a similar mistake. Instead of making excuses, instead of deflecting blame, this officer took complete responsibility. And then, and this is the important part, they worked harder than anyone I've witnessed in my 28 years with this department to turn that moment of failure into a foundation for excellence. Jake couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. "Officer Jake Morrison," Chief Rodriguez continued, "has logged over 800 volunteer hours with the K9 unit. He's completed advanced certifications in K9 first aid, scent detection theory, and tactical K9 deployment. He's assisted in 12 successful operations, personally prevented an injury during a public demonstration, and has been described by Commander Mitchell as the most naturally gifted handler candidate I've seen in a decade." Mitchell stood, his expression proud. "Morrison, get up here." Jake's legs somehow remembered how to work. He walked to the podium in a daze, the applause thundering in his ears. Chief Rodriguez shook his hand and presented a plaque that read, "Officer of the Year Jake Morrison, dedication, growth, excellence." But Mitchell had one more surprise. "Chief, if I may," Mitchell took the microphone. "Morrison, 6 months ago I submitted your name for early consideration in the K9 Handler program. It was an unusual request. You barely had a year on the force when most candidates have 3 to 5 years minimum experience." Jake's heart was doing things hearts probably weren't designed to do. "The selection committee reviewed your file last month. Your training evaluations, your performance reviews, your volunteer work, and something else." Mitchell paused, a slight smile touching his usually stern face. "I submitted over 30 letters of recommendation from officers across this department. Officers who have watched you grow, who have worked with you, who trust you." Rex stood up from beneath the table and walked to Mitchell's side, sitting at perfect attention. "Jake Morrison, you've been accepted into the K9 Handler training program. You start in 2 weeks. The room erupted. Jake's vision blurred. He realized he was crying and didn't care. His parents were on their feet. Emily was shouting something he couldn't hear through the noise. Officers he barely knew were cheering. Mitchell extended his hand again, but when Jake took it, the commander pulled him into a brief, firm hug. "Your dog is waiting for you at the training facility," Mitchell said quietly enough that only Jake could hear. "A 2-year-old German Shepherd named Titan. He's smart, he's eager, and he needs a handler who will treat him like the partner he deserves to be." "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just keep being the officer who took responsibility, learned from mistakes, and never stopped working to be better." Mitchell stepped back. "And Morrison, Catherine would have liked you. She always said the best officers were the ones who loved the dogs as much as the job." It was the highest compliment Mitchell could give, and Jake knew it. As the ceremony continued, Jake returned to his seat. Rex followed him, which was unusual. The German Shepherd sat beside Jake's chair, then did something he'd never done before. He rested his head on Jake's knee. Jake's hand automatically moved to scratch behind the dog's ears, and Rex's tail wagged contentedly. "He doesn't do that for most people," Officer Park observed. "Rex has always been selective about who he trusts." "I spilled coffee on him," Jake said, still marveling at the dog's forgiveness. "You did," Mitchell agreed from across the table. "And then you spent a year proving you were worth forgiving. That matters more than the mistake ever did." Later, as the ceremony wound down and people migrated toward the reception area, Jake found himself standing outside with Rex, looking up at the Los Angeles skyline. The same city he'd been so terrified of patrolling 11 months ago now felt like home. "You know what's funny?" Jake said to Rex, who tilted his head attentively. "If I hadn't spilled that coffee, if I'd had a perfect first day, I probably would have coasted. I would have been a mediocre officer doing mediocre work." Rex's tail wagged. "But I screwed up, badly, in front of everyone, and it gave me something to prove." Jake crouched down to Rex's level. "So thank you for being patient with the clumsy rookie, and for giving me a reason to be better." Rex licked his face, one long slobbery swipe that would have horrified Jake 11 months ago. Now he just laughed. Mitchell emerged from the hotel, his jacket draped over one arm. "Talking to my dog, Morrison." "He's a good listener, sir." "That he is." Mitchell joined them, his hand resting naturally on Rex's head. "You ready for what comes next? Handler training is brutal. Most candidates wash out." "I know, sir." Jake stood, his dress uniform somehow feeling more authentic than it ever had. "But I didn't come this far to quit now." "No," Mitchell agreed, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "I didn't think you would." They stood there for a moment, Commander, Rookie, and K9, looking out at the city they'd sworn to protect. In 2 weeks, Jake would begin the hardest challenge of his career. He'd meet Titan, his future partner, and start building the kind of bond that had saved Emily all those years ago. But tonight, he was exactly where he needed to be. A second-chance officer who turned his worst moment into his greatest opportunity, standing beside the man who'd believed in him when belief seemed impossible, and the dog who taught him that forgiveness was earned through action, not words. Jake Morrison had poured coffee on a police dog. And somehow, impossibly, it had become the best mistake of his life. The end.